Hi everyone. So in this lecture series, we'll be discussing about the elasticity of demand. So beginning with the concept of elasticity of demand. So the concept of elasticity of demand was given by Alfred Marshall. So he stated that the elasticity of demand measures the responsiveness or the change in demand due to factors like price, income, price of related goods, and so on. So please note that the elasticity of demand measures the responsiveness. That if we are taking two factors into consideration, one being the price and the other being the demand, and we want to know that how will the change in price affect the quantity demanded. So this is reflected by your elasticity of demand. So elasticity of demand answers you the question, how much? So how much change will take place? That if you reduce the price, then how much change will be seen in the quantity demanded? Right. So with this, we come to the differences between the quantity demanded and the elasticity of demand. So first difference is that the demand is qualitative in nature, in the sense that the demand tells you, say for example, the law of demand. It tells you that if the price falls, the demand increases. So it is qualitative in nature. It is telling you that, okay, there is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. That is stated by demand, the concept of demand. But the elasticity of demand tells you that how much change will be there. That if your price reduces, if you reduce the price, then how much change will take place in the quantity demanded. As a result, the elasticity of demand is quantitative in nature. Okay. Second point is that it gives the direction to where the demand will go with the change in price. So the concept of demand tells you the direction of change, whether there will be an inverse relationship or there will be a direct and positive relationship and so on. So this is stated by the concept of demand. But the elasticity of demand tells you the extent of change in the demand due to change in price. So it tells you how much change will take place. Right. Coming on to the kinds of elasticity. So first kind is the elasticity of substitution. So mathematically, if we state, then elasticity of substitution is equal to your change in the proportionate quantities, right, divided by the proportion of quantities. This is one, divided by the whole, divided by change in your relative prices upon the ratio of relative prices, right? So the change, it can be further simplified as, it can be further simplified as change in qx by qy, right, divided by qx by qy. Okay, so this divided by, right, change in mrs xy upon mrs xy. So I come on to a basic mathematical thing of our initial years of schooling. So if I further simplify it, this is change in qx by qy upon qx by qy multiplied by your mrs xy divided by change in mrs xy. Right. So now we go on to the two classifications of goods. So first is your perfect substitutes. Now in case of perfect substitutes, the MRS is constant, which implies that the change in MRS XY will be equal to 0. So when MRS in case of 1 is say 10 and MRS in case of say 1 2 is 20, sorry 10 again. So there is the change is 0, there is no change in the code. So therefore the change in MRS is equal to 0. So this figure becomes 0, right? As a result, the elasticity of substitution becomes infinity, right? So when your denominator is 0, the ratio in itself becomes infinity. So in case of perfect substitutes, the MRS XY is constant. But okay, the price of say good one increases or doubles, I'll reduce the quantity demanded of it by double, and the other, like I'll start consuming more of the other good, like I'll consume the same proportion of the other good instead of the initially consumed one. So an elasticity of substitution becomes infinity. But what happens in case of your perfect complements, right? In case of your perfect complements, your MRS, because they both are consumed together, the perfect complements are consumed together, so the MRS XY becomes 0. So when this figure is 0, right? So the entire figure of elasticity of substitution becomes 0. Right, when there is no possibility of substitution, when the two goods are perfect complements, then the marginal rate of substitution will also be equal to 0. As a result, the entire figure becomes 0. Right. So with this, we come on to the definitions of elasticity of substitution. It is the proportionate change in the relative demand of the two goods, X and Y, to the proportionate change in relative prices, which can be represented by marginal rate of substitution. So this was the first kind of elasticity of demand. The second is the price elasticity, right? So we go on to the formula. Elasticity of price is equal to negative sign, I'll explain it later, change in quantity, proportionate change in quantity divided by proportionate change in price. Right. So definition is that price elasticity is the proportionate change in quantity demanded divided by the proportionate change in price. Now this minus sign shows you the relationship between your quantity and price. It states that there is an inverse relationship between quantity demanded and price of the good. That is what is explained by this minus sign, right? Coming on to the shapes of the curve, right? So what are the degrees of price elasticity? Now, first, easiest way is that price elasticity can be 1. It can be a unitary price elastic. In this case, what happens is that the proportionate change in quantity demanded is equal to the proportionate change in price. And how will be the shape of the demand curve? It will be a rectangular hyperbola. This is an important question and it has come several times in the examination. So the shape of the demand curve will be rectangular hyperbola when the price elasticity is equal to 1. Coming on to the price elasticity being less than 1. So this implies that the change in quantity demanded, the proportionate change in quantity demanded, is less than the proportionate change in price. which means that quantity demanded is less responsive to the change in price. In simple words, it does not matter to the consumer whether or not price increases or decreases. The consumer will consume the commodity. He might reduce the consumption or reduce the extent of consumption, but he will still consume it. So if there is, I'll give you an example, a basic example. So if say there is like a decrease in price to say initial price was rupees say 10, and now the new increased price is rupees 20, so it has increased by double. So initial quantity demanded was say 10, right? But the new quantity demanded is say 7, right? So even though the price has increased by double, the quantity reduced is not halved, right? So if elasticity would have been equal to 1, so the new quantity demanded would have been 5, but it is 7. Even though the relationship is inverse, but still there is quantity or demanded of it, right? So the demand curve in this case will be a steeper one. This will be a steeper demand curve, right? So even though the price is price is increasing more, or sorry, price is decreasing more, the quantity demanded increased is less. And this is a case mostly of say necessities, that you will consume the commodity, you will be consuming it, you'll lower your consumption, or you will try to save more, like you will prolong the use of the commodity, but you'll still consume it. So the best example here is of the necessities, right? Third is when your price elasticity is greater than 1, right? So price elasticity is greater than 1. This implies that the change in quantity demanded is greater than the proportionate change in quantity demanded is greater than the proportionate change in price, right? So even though the price has reduced like less, the quantity demanded of it has increased considerably, right? So in this case, the demand curve will be a flatter curve, stating that say this was P1, Q1, right? And second, we have the price reduces, right, by P2 to P2 and Q2. So the change in price is this much, right? But the change in quantity demanded, which has increased, is much more than the change in price, right? And this is mostly prevalent in case of your luxuries, right? So this is mostly in case of luxuries. So elasticity is greater than 1. Next we have is your price elasticity is equal to infinity. So in this case, the demand curve will be a horizontal line parallel to your x-axis, which is quantity demanded, right? So this states that even if the price say increases, you lose the entire demand, right? You decrease the price, you'll get the entire demand, like entire market demand. And this is very much possible when the goods are perfect substitutes. So this is the example of perfect substitutes. When you have perfect substitutes available in the market, you have a strong competition, and as a result, if you modify or you change the price, either if you decrease the price you get the entire market demand, and if you increase the price you lose the entire market demand. So a horizontal line parallel to x-axis is when price elasticity equals to infinity. And last case is when price elasticity equals to 0. This is the case when the demand curve is a vertical line parallel to the y-axis, which is denominated as price, right? So even if you increase the price, there will be no change in quantity demanded, right? If you decrease the price, there will be no change in the quantity demanded. A person will consume what he has to consume. For example, the case like medicines, right? If you take an allopathy course, you won't be like, okay, the price has increased, I'll increase the consumption of tablets to say 4 a day instead of 2. No, you'll consume as much as you want to, as much as you're prescribed. Only that much of the allopathy treatment you can consume. So this is the case when price elasticity is equal to 0. So these were the degrees of price elasticity, right? Now the measurement of price elasticity. So first measure which we've already done is the percentage method, right? Percentage method or proportionate method, which is, I'll repeat again, that price elasticity is equal to minus sign change in quantity upon quantity divided by change in price upon price. This is the proportionate or percentage method. Second method is the point elasticity method, right? So the point elasticity method is lower segment upon your upper segment, right? So you have a demand curve here, starting from this, sorry, that shape, but assume that this is a straight line demand curve. The midpoint will be elasticity of price is equal to 1. The lowest point is elasticity of price is equal to 0. And the topmost point, that elasticity of price is equal to infinity. So this region will have elasticity of price less than 1. And this region will have elasticity of price greater than 1. Right? So this method is lower segment upon upper segment. Third method is the arc elasticity method, sorry. Right. So arc elasticity method is used like it measures the elasticity of demand between 2 points on the curve by using the midpoint between the two curves. And it is used when the changes are somewhat large. So it's like, for example, like if you want to, this is your curve, sorry, this is your curve, right? And you want to measure the price elasticity between these 2 points, not 1 point, but over the entire this range. It is then you will use the method of arc elasticity. So the change here, like you want to measure over the entire range, how much will there be a change in quantity demanded with the change in price. So it is then you are using arc elasticity method. So the change is large in this case. Remember that. Okay. And the formula is, it also termed as the midpoint formula, right? So the change in quantity divided by Q1 plus Q2 upon change in price divided by P1 plus P2. This will be your price elasticity method, right? Fourth method we have is the revenue method, right? So this is usually used by the producers, and we'll do this and we'll use this in the theories of market structure. So revenue method. Right. So in the revenue method is mathematically represented as AR upon AR minus MR. Right. So this is mostly for producers, because obviously the consumers have budget and the producers have their own revenue. The consumers have income, producers have revenue, and as per that we'll be calculating the revenue method. using the revenue method to calculate the elasticity. Sorry. Right. Fifth is your total expenditure method. Right. This was given by Marshall. Right. So this method calculates the price elasticity by way of analyzing the impact of price change on the total expenditure made by the consumer. So how will this reflect the change? So the relationship between price and quantity remains the same, right? So if this is increasing, this is increasing, sorry, there's an inverse relationship throughout, right? But there's a change in expenditure. So then I'll keep that there's a decrease in price, right? So when with the decrease in price, your total expenditure remains constant. So in this case, the elasticity of demand is equal to 1. When price decreases and your expenditure, right, it increases, right? So the elasticity of demand is greater than 1. And when there's a decrease in price, which leads to a decrease in expenditure, so the elasticity of demand is less than 1. Right? So when there is no relationship between price and expenditure, elasticity of demand is equal to 1. When there is an inverse relationship between price and expenditure, the elasticity of demand is greater than 1. When there is a direct relationship between price and expenditure, the elasticity of demand is less than 1. So these were the methods to calculate the price elasticity. Next we have is the income elasticity method, right? So income elasticity, right? So it is the responsiveness of the change in quantity demanded due to change in income levels. Now, in case of income elasticity, you need to classify the goods first. You have normal goods, and in this you have necessities and your luxuries, right? Then you have your inferior goods. So in case of normal goods, there is a positive relationship between income and demand, right? There's a positive relationship, right? So if there's an increase in income, there will be an increase in demand, right? And that implies that the elasticity of it will be positive and will be greater than 0. But in case of inferior goods, right, there is a negative relationship between income and demand, implying that if there is an increase in income, the quantity demanded will decrease, right? Coming on to the further classification of normal goods. So when we know that in case of income elasticity of normal goods, there is income elasticity is greater than 0. So how do we classify between necessities and luxuries? So in case of necessities, the income elasticity will be greater than 0, but will be less than 1. Right? So in other words, it will be between 0 and 1, income and income elasticity. But in case of luxuries, income elasticity will be greater than 1. Right? So I'll just read out what this states. It states that the income elasticity equal to 0 plays a very crucial role here, that it segregates between the two categories of goods, that is normal and inferior goods. So if income elasticity is greater than 0, the good is a normal good, right? And if it is less than 0, the good is an inferior good, right? So if the income elasticity is between 0 and 1, the good is a necessity good. And if the income elasticity is greater than 1, the good is a luxury good, right? So coming on to the angel curve. right? So the angel curve is the graphical presentation of relationship between income and quantity demanded. We'll learn about this in later lectures as well. So the angel curve is the graphical representation of relationship between income and quantity demanded, right? So in case of a necessity goods, right, you will have an upward and a steeper angel curve, upward sloping but a steeper angel curve. And in case of luxury goods, you will have an upward sloping and a flatter angel curve. But in case of inferior goods, you will have a downward sloping angel curve, right? Last we have is the cross elasticity of demand. So cross elasticity of demand is the proportionate change in the quantity demanded of say good X divided by the proportionate change in the price of related goods, that is the other goods say Y. So the cross elasticity of demand measures the degree of responsiveness of the change in demand for one good in response to the change in price of another good. And in this case also we have substitutes, we have complements, and we have unrelated goods. So in case of substitute goods, your elasticity, cross elasticity will be positive. So say if the price of say Y is increasing, right, the quantity demanded of X will increase, right? In case of complements, the cross elasticity will be negative. That if the price of Y is increasing, right? Say price of Y is increasing, so the quantity demanded of X will decrease because X and Y are consumed together, right? And in case of unrelated goods, right? So cross elasticity will be equal to 0. So that implies that if price of Y is increasing, there will be no change in the quantity demanded of X. That means there is no effect and they're not related goods. So the cross elasticity is equal to 0. So with this, we come to the end of the lecture, Elasticity of Demand. Hope you liked it, and thank you, and see you for the next lecture, which will be Theories of Consumer Demand.